Hello and welcome to Thursday in Parliament. The main news from Westminster. The Brexit bill has been published, but some MPs say the government hasn't allowed enough time to debate it.
I was astonished at the amount of time that the Leader of the House has given this Parliament to debate it.
A new direction for US foreign policy. The Foreign Secretary chooses his words carefully.
I don't think we've seen any policy changes, official policy changes or policy pronouncements.
And Gordon Brown warns there's not enough money to educate the world's poorest children.
Half the children of the world will be without the qualifications they need, and that is indeed a crisis that has got to be dealt with.
The day kicked off with questions to David Davis, the Secretary of State for exiting the EU. The Prime Minister has announced that there will be a white paper setting out the government's Brexit strategy. Many MPs wanted to know when the document would appear.
Can I thank the Secretary of State very much for the part he played, I know, in securing the white paper. That has been welcomed across the House, and it's good news. Could he now tell us, does he know when it might be when it might be published, and how much time this place will have to debate it?
Well, of course, this is a decision solely of the Prime Minister to publish the white paper, but it is nice to be able to agree with myself from 6 months ago. In terms of timing, look, we are going to be... sorry, my voice and the microphone together. In terms of timing, the Prime Minister said in due course yesterday, it will be as expeditious as we can be. It takes time. She knows, she's been in government. These things have a procedure. It takes time to do, but we won't waste time in producing it for the House.
Stephen Giffins.
Here.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wish the Secretary of State gets his voice back, so I know he'll be needing it over the next couple of weeks. Does he think that we should be able to see the white paper before we consider legislation?
Here.
Well, with respect to the honourable gentleman, these are slightly separate issues. There'll be lots of legislation. I assume, I'm going to look at him to see if he nods, I assume he's referring to the Article 50 legislation. Yeah, he is. The Article 50 legislation is about carrying out the will of the British people. The decision was taken on June 23rd. There'll be much more legislation after that, which will relate to policy, to the maintenance of European law. That's the Great Repeal Bill, but also the other new primary legislation arising from that. So it's certainly going to be before all that. And as I said, I'll be as expeditious as is reasonable.
I'm concerned by some of the responses from the Secretary of State, who seem to be bursting with enthusiasm about this white paper. Now it seems we may not get it as soon as we need it. Given the level of interest in the legislation and the amendments that are going to be tabled, we need this white paper before committee stage of this bill. Will he make sure we get it?
You know, how do you deal with an opposition that won't take yes for an answer, really? I have said we'll deal with it. I will produce it as expeditiously as possible, as quickly as possible. What can you do faster than that?
Any Chapman?
Well, he can work as fast as he can, I suppose, but we do need it before committee stage. When we get it, will it be a cut and paste of the Prime Minister's speech, or instead, will we have assessments of the financial impact on this country of different options?
Well, let me start. As I said at the beginning, the Prime Minister's speech, one of the clearest expositions of international policy I've heard in many, many years, answered all of the questions that the opposition and Brexit committee raised, other than those which would actively undermine our negotiating position.
Labour will be putting down amendments to the Brexit bill.
Now we have a commitment to a white paper. The role of Parliament in the Article 50 process needs to be determined. That's why Labour will seek to table an amendment to the proposed Article 50 bill to require the Secretary of State to lay periodic reports at intervals of no less than 2 months on progress of the negotiations under Article 50. Will the Secretary of State commit now to the principle of periodic reports?
Like he's not going to do that.
Well, from behind me I hear like he's not going to do that. Yeah, so, every 2 months, since the start of this, since September, There's been 5 months. I've done 5 statements in front of this House, 10 debates, appeared in front of a number of select committees, and that process will continue. I suspect 2 months will be rather an unambitious aim.
And a little later, a bill paving the way for the UK's exit from the European Union was presented to Parliament. It's called the European Union Notification of Withdrawal Bill.
Presentation of Bill. Mr. Secretary David Davis.
European Union Notification of Withdrawal Bill.
Second reading what day?
Tomorrow, Madam.
And the Commons leader, David Lidington, announced the timetable for debating the bill in the Commons.
Tuesday the 31st of January. Second reading of the European Union Notification of Withdrawal Bill, Day 1. Wednesday the 1st of February. Conclusion of second reading of the European Union Notification of Withdrawal Bill. Monday the 6th of February. Consideration in committee of the European Union Notification of Withdrawal Bill, Day 1. Tuesday the 7th of February. Continuation of consideration in committee of the European Union Notification of Withdrawal Bill. Wednesday the 8th of February. Conclusion of consideration in committee of the European Union Notification of Withdrawal Bill, followed by remaining stages of the European Union Notification of Withdrawal Bill.
So that's 5 days for debating the bill. As you can hear from the jeers, some MPs didn't think the government was allowing enough time.
What a week it's going to be. First, there was to be no vote. Now there's a vote. Then there was to be no bill, and now there's a bill. Then there was to be no white paper. Now there's to be a white paper. We should have chanced our arm and said there should be definitely staying in the European Union. The second reading will be next Tuesday, and of course we know that there will be the committee of the whole House the following week, with everything rushed through and concluded the following Thursday. Now, as the leader of the House, as the guardian of this House's procedure and its business, will he now guarantee today and right now that there will be a white paper published in time for the committee of the whole House, so that this House can consider that white paper in a bill of such importance and such magnitude?
I was astonished at the amount of time that the Leader of the House has given this Parliament to debate it. And he's being very coy about whether the white paper will be published before the committee stage of the bill. Can he give us more time and tell us he's going to publish the white paper before next week?
I think if you consider that this is a two-clause bill, which the second clause is dealing only with the extent of the bill to the United Kingdom, there is plenty of time, including 2 full days at second reading, for all opinions to be fully expressed.
Just 3 days to debate the detail of the most important issue facing this country in a generation, the repercussions of which will face generations to come, is totally unacceptable. And I would hope that every opposition party in this House and every member who cares about parliamentary democracy will vote against this contempt of Parliament when it comes to the programme motion.
Well, I'd simply say to the honourable gentleman that his party supported the referendum bill and putting the question to the people, and his party supported the timetable of triggering Article 50 by the end of March. And the bill is designed to secure that those objectives are met.
Now, the UK is in a position to show international leadership to end the fighting in Yemen and prevent a famine. That's the view of the SNP's Tasmina Ahmed Sheikh, who called for an urgent statement about the conflict between the forces loyal to Yemen's President Hadi and the Houthi rebels. The Foreign Office Minister set out the UK's position.
The UK supports the Saudi Arabian-led coalition military intervention, which came at the request of the legitimate President Hadi. And we are clear through that coalition and the government of Yemen, military gains must be used to drive forward the political process.
He said the UK was playing a leading role in diplomatic efforts.
I last spoke to President Hadi on the 15th of January to discuss the importance of taking measures to prevent economic collapse, and we continue to strongly support the tireless efforts of the UN Special Envoy in trying to achieve a political settlement. We are providing over £1 million to the UN Special Envoy's office to bolster the UN's capacity to facilitate the peace process. And the UN Special Envoy, Ismail Ahmed, is due to brief the Security Council today in New York on the latest developments on the UN's plans.
When the UN Security Council meets this afternoon, it will do so against a backdrop of heavy fighting in the Red Sea ports of Al-Mawqa and Al-Hodaydah and an increasingly dire humanitarian situation across the country. There are already 7 million people starving in Yemen. If these ports are destroyed or besieged, then delivery of vital aid, which is required to avert famine in Yemen, will become even more difficult. The only way to prevent this unfolding humanitarian disaster deteriorating even further is to agree an immediate ceasefire. Today's meeting of the UN Security Council provides a key opportunity to bring that closer. The SNP believes, Mr Speaker, that the UK is in a unique position to be able to show positive international leadership in order to bring about the ceasefire to which I refer.
I understand her desire to want to call for a ceasefire, a cessation of hostilities immediately. We will see what comes out of the meeting today and comes out from the United Nations. But I'm absolutely in agreement with her. This is what we actually want to happen. Calling for it needs to work in conjunction with the art of the possible. Otherwise, it simply is just words. So in order for us to be able to ensure that it will hold, we need to be able to say what happens if one of the sides, either of the sides, actually breaches the cessation of hostilities.
He talks about the need for a political solution. When is he going to present our resolution to the United Nations? When are we going to get proper investigations into alleged violations of international humanitarian law? Why are we continuing to sell Saudi Arabia the arms to wage this conflict? And ultimately, when are we going to bring the suffering of the people of Yemen to an end and then get the humanitarian aid to them that they need? Every debate, every month, now every year, we ask the same basic questions, and every time the minister, whose name is now, I'm afraid, synonymous with the Yemen conflict, stands there and gives us the same non-answers.
The Minister, Tobias Ellwood, said arms sales were subject to strict controls and insisted that aid was getting to the people caught up in this awful conflict. You're watching Thursday in Parliament with me, Christina Cooper. Now, as the Prime Minister was preparing to meet Donald Trump, the Foreign Secretary was facing a group of peers. Theresa May wants to enhance the UK's special relationship with the US. And President Trump has said he wants a quick trade deal with Britain. Boris Johnson, however, had to admit to significant policy differences between Downing Street and the White House, not least on the use of torture.
We have had statements from the new president to ABC which showed pretty fundamental disregard for a whole number of the United States international obligations, most specifically under the Torture Convention.
We have to be very careful with this. I don't think we've seen any policy changes, official policy changes or policy pronouncements. And on the matter of torture, which you rightly draw attention, I think the Prime Minister made the position of the government very clear yesterday in the House of Commons, and that is unchanged.
Mrs May has said the UK does not sanction torture. What about refugees?
Do you think it's acceptable under international obligations shared by the UK and the US to have a ban on refugees from certain Middle East countries?
I don't want to disappoint the committee by retreating too much into this formula, but we haven't yet seen the legislation brought forward. Rather than get into some sort of hypothetical dispute, let's see exactly what the proposals are.
And what about the nuclear agreement with Iran? Mr Trump has said it's the worst deal ever made.
I assume that is not the view of the government, since the government is a party to the deal and doesn't presumably go around making the worst deals ever made.
I think we've already made our views very clear to the Trump administration that we think that trying to improve relations with Iran is through this deal. It's a pretty cautious thing. Is on the whole a good thing, and we regard that as one of the achievements of the Obama administration.
And then to what may prove one of the most difficult dilemmas: Syria.
President Trump's been very clear that he wants to eliminate radical Islamic militancy from the face of the earth, and he's also been clear that he's prepared to have a new approach to prioritise the defeat of ISIS, possibly in cooperation with Russia. Would you support a change of US-UK direction in that to support those goals, possibly even joining forces figuratively and militarily with Russia to do so?
We are already, with the United States, engaged very heavily in attacking Daesh in Iraq. The committee will know that we are more than 1,000 sorties have been flown. I think almost 1,200. We're there.
Are you prepared to see an alliance of forces, including Russia, attack Daesh?
To switch sides, to come in on the side of Assad and the Russians would be seen, I think, as a great betrayal of the people of Syria who have opposed Assad. It would be seen as a betrayal of the moderate armed opposition that we have supported, and it would be it would have grave repercussions in the area.
We might find ourselves in days and weeks to come where the United States is on a different side of this argument. That would put us on a direct collision, or not even a collision, but on two different sides of this argument with the closest allies that we are trying to forge even more special relationship than it has been over the last decades. How would we deal with that?
If there is a possibility of an arrangement with the Russians that simultaneously allows Assad to move towards the exit and diminishes Iranian influence in the region by getting rid of Assad, and allows us to join with the Russians in attacking Daesh and wiping them off the face of the earth, or whatever the President has said, then that might be a way forward.
But there were, he said, no good options.
Even if we did achieve the end, this is the real kicker, nor is it clear that even if we did achieve the end of the Assad regime, that Syria would be in a better place.
The Brexit Secretary David Davis also faced questions about Donald Trump's remarks on the use of torture.
The Prime Minister will today meet an American president who champions torture and who is proud to discriminate against Muslims. Would the Secretary of State therefore agree with me that it is even more important that his government send a strong moral message? Goods and chattels are bargaining chips, human beings are not. Will he confirm the residency rights of EU nationals?
The Honourable Lady knows my stance on torture down the years, better than most, I suspect, and the British government's stance on torture is very plain. We don't condone it, we don't agree with it under any circumstances whatsoever.
The Labour former Prime Minister Gordon Brown has returned to Parliament for a few hours at least to talk to a committee of MPs about the challenges he faces in his new job as the UN Special Envoy for Education. He talked about what he'd seen firsthand when he visited some developing countries.
If you go to a place like South Sudan, where I was a few months ago, and I don't know if the committee's been there recently, you were there some years ago, and I know that, and you meet mothers who have come across the border from Sudan into South Sudan, virtually refugees, and I met a group of mothers. The one thing they want for the children is education. Yeah. I mean, we forget that they put shelter sometimes secondary to the importance that their child has the best chance in life. And I was in a village just outside Juba, and there was this BRAC project, the Bangladesh group who do these small huts at schools. So there were places in that school for only about 20 kids. And I remember being in that hut, and there was a small portal, and looking in on that portal were about 100 kids who were unable to get the education they want. And there was a mother who told me she had to choose between one of her twins at 8 years old, which went to school.
A Labour MP quoted the chief executive of the Global Partnership for Education.
As part of this inquiry in November, Alice Albright, and I would have liked her to be the Democratic candidate, but the chair won't allow me to go there, I don't think, has told this committee that there is a funding crisis in global education. Do you agree?
Absolutely. As more money has gone into humanitarian shelter and survival, as infrastructure, agriculture have got money, as health has got more money, education has suffered. And unless we now realise that by 2030 there will be 800 million children, half the children of the world, 800 million children who will not finish education with any qualification of any value whatsoever. And in 2030, on current trends, 200 million will still be out of school and never finish the primary education. 400 million will only get primary level qualifications. And as I said, half the children of the world will be without the qualifications they need. And that is indeed a crisis that has got to be dealt with. But the international community has got a duty to step in when we know that countries will not meet the targets, and we know that we have got a duty, we've agreed to meet, that every child be in education. So we need to do something about international aid and funding. I say that 15% of aid at least should go to education.
He moved on to talk about an initiative for youngsters in Lebanon.
About a third of its country is refugees. And in a unique project which is called the double shift school system. Yeah. So you're using the same school in the morning for Lebanese children, in the afternoon for Syrian refugees. They've managed to get almost 250,000 children into school in this country.
Yeah. Now, given that I'm sure you would agree that it's vital that we commit money to humanitarian aid and indeed to the very important issue of health, and given that we are at 0.7%, so there's no room for increase, although there's no room for decrease, where would you see additional funds in education coming from?
I do regret the fact that DFID has reduced the share of education in its aid budget from something like 12 to 15%, I think, in the last decade, to about 7% now. I do understand that some of that is for humanitarian aid, but I think that there is money to be found for education in other parts of the DFID budget without affecting health, for example, which I know you and I think is important as well. So I think there are ways forward.
Gordon Brown making a brief appearance back in Parliament. Now, the Supreme Court ruled against the government on Tuesday, saying that Parliament should authorise the triggering of Article 50. That followed a lengthy and complex court case. Some MPs want to know how much it all cost.
My Lords, the figures for the total costs associated with the case will be published in due course.
I live in hope. I had hoped that the welcome announcement yesterday of a white paper might have tempted the noble lord into answer my question in another welcome U-turn today. But can I put a serious issue to him? The Prime Minister has been clear that she would invoke Article 50 by the end of March. Now, given that that is her deadline of her choosing, does he accept that it would have been more open and democratic if the past 2 months had been used for parliamentary debate rather than the rushed process we have now during the delay it's been considered by judges in the courts?
Well, I dispute, I'm sorry, the premise upon which that question is founded, I'm sorry to say. The government believed, as did a number of others, including the leader of the opposition straight after the referendum, that the triggering of Article 50 was a matter for the royal prerogative. That was disputed. As I said yesterday, people have a right to be able to dispute these matters in court. That matter was taken for court, and the judgment has been passed. My Lords, I would also dispute that the last few months have not been one of parliamentary scrutiny. I have very much enjoyed coming to this House and answering questions and giving statements and doing other things, and I'm sure that we will continue to do so.
Does my noble friend not think it extraordinary to have had that question when the leader of the opposition wanted to move Article 50 the week after the referendum result?
Well, my Lords, it was the day after the referendum result he said this, and that is absolutely the case, and we were not alone, therefore, in assuming that we would be able to use the royal prerogative on the triggering of Article 50.
My Lords, the courts have required the government to come to Parliament to trigger the negotiating process, and the government said that Parliament will have a vote at the end of it. But what plans does the government have to involve Parliament and consult Parliament during the course of the negotiations? Or is it the case that for the entire negotiating process, Parliament will actually have no significant role in influencing the negotiations themselves?
Very sorry to say, the noble lord, I don't know whether I have been somewhere else or he has been somewhere else when I've been answering questions here, giving statements and making debates. And this will continue, my lords. This will continue. We are absolutely committed to ensuring that this House and the other place will have ample opportunity to scrutinise the negotiations as they proceed. Furthermore, my lords, as I have set out on a number of occasions, there will also be the Great Repeal Bill and the legislation that will flow from that, which will give your lordships, I can assure you, a great amount of legislative fodder upon which we can all deliberate.
So, lots to look forward to. And that's it for me for now. But do join me on Friday night at 11 for a roundup of a fast-moving week for Brexit here at Westminster. But until then, from me, Christina Cooper, goodbye.